What you see right now is my old laptop, and judging by what you saw already, you're probably telling yourself, oh, it's just another Lenovo laptop, what's so special about it? Well, not much admittedly, but I decided to review it just for fun, so if you want to see me doing that, then stay with me in this video. Judging by what the red and black sticker says, this is a Lenovo IdeaPad 100 laptop. Flipping the laptop, however, reveals the particular model of this laptop, and it's 15IBY80MJ. The laptop has a sleek design, all black from the top of the monitor to the trackpad. It has a plastic construction, and it feels quite sturdy and strong just by touching it. The keyboard, which has a numpad, also feels nice to use, however the trackpad isn't as good. The 15IBY has one USB 3.0 port, one USB 2.0 port, an HDMI port, a headphone jack, a hardly accessible tiny button from which you can access the laptop's BIOS, a DVD drive, which I don't think anyone would need in 2022, and finally let's not forget the webcam. As for the battery, well, this laptop's battery lasts when unplugged for around 4 to 6 hours when the laptop is not under heavy load, and around 1 to 2 hours when the laptop is under heavy load. The display is a 15-inch 1366 by 768 one, a very common native resolution for a laptop display, but one that may seem too tiny to you for a 15-inch laptop monitor. The viewing angles of the display also aren't good. Having taken a quick look at the design and external features of the ATMJ, I think it's now time to talk about the specs of this laptop. And well, this Intel Inside sticker that you're seeing right now doesn't tell us much about them, so instead we have to open the control panel and go to System. Actually screw it, let's just straight up open the Task Manager. CPU utilization skyrockets just by trying to open the Task Manager. Not a good sign at all. Anyway, time for the moment of truth. Am I inside a nightmare, or is this real? Yes, that's right. This laptop doesn't have an Intel Core, nor does it have even a Pentium. No, it's got a Celeron, more specifically, an Intel Celeron N2840, released in mid-2014. This processor has 2 cores with very decent clock speeds for a Celeron made for laptops, especially if you compare it to other laptop Celerons from that period, with base clock speeds of 2.16 GHz and turbo boost clock speeds of up to 2.58 GHz. Judging by these clock speeds, one may assume that this little Celeron might not be as bad as one may think. Well, yeah, about that. This particular Celeron is a power efficient one, with a TDP of only 7.5 watts, and it's a Bay Trail processor, based on the Silvermont microarchitecture primarily created for super low power Intel Atoms, but also implemented on some Celerons, including the N2840 and even a few unfortunate Pentiums. This effectively means that the Celeron N2840 that the IdeaPad 100 15IBY has is an Atom-based CPU, and if you thought that wasn't bad enough, well, for the cherry on top, Intel decided to make the N2800 series of CPUs even worse by adding only 1 MB of L2 cache to them, with the N2840, the most powerful one of them, not being spared of that either. I guess clock speeds just don't matter in the N2840's case. Even more hilarious is its recommended price set by Intel, $107. As for graphics performance, well, my IdeaPad 100 15IBY doesn't have a dedicated GPU, and instead uses the crappy Intel Atom iGPU of the N2840. This particular CPU's integrated graphics have a base frequency of 311 MHz, a burst frequency of 792 MHz, and only 4 pipelines. For comparison, the Intel HD 4000 has 16 pipelines and burst frequency of up to 1.35 GHz depending on the CPU. This means that the iGPU of the N2840 ends up performing comparably to a GeForce 210 in best case scenarios, and we all know how badly this GPU performs. It supports Intel QuickSync though, for which you can give it credit I guess. As for RAM, it has 4GB of single-channel DDR3 RAM clocked at 1333 MHz, and as for storage, it uses a 500GB hard drive instead of an SSD, though when you pair it with such a sad little CPU with only 1MB of L2 cache, this hardly even matters. Now, given how weak the specs of this laptop are, some of you are probably already asking themselves how much did this laptop cost at the time when it was bought. The answer is roughly $250, which is a little bit too much for a laptop with such weak specs, even though laptops and desktop computers are generally more expensive in my country than in other countries, as the country where I live isn't the most prosperous ever, and the same can be said for other not so prosperous countries. Another thing I have to mention is that this particular Lenovo IdeaPad 100 model comes in different configurations, as you can see in this picture. Some have the more powerful Celeron N2940 or the Pentium N3540, both of which are also Bay Trail low power CPUs, while other ones unfortunately only have 2GB of RAM. But most people who own this laptop model end up having the same configuration as my IdeaPad, minus the HDD probably. But this would not be a review of my old laptop if I don't test how it actually performs, and for that, I will benchmark some games on it, just to give myself an idea of how the IdeaPad 100 15IBY 80MJ actually performs. I don't have high expectations for it, given how weak its specs are, but I will still give it a chance nonetheless. I will use MSI Afterburner to monitor the frame rate, frame time, RAM usage and CPU and iGPU usage, and I will also use it to record the averages, 1% lows and maximum figures exhibited by the games. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that this laptop uses Windows 10 Pro version 1903, which may or may not be a limiting factor to the overall performance. Anyways, let's see how an Atom-based dual-core Celeron and its integrated graphics perform when it comes out to gaming. Right, so if you haven't figured it out already, this is basically another one of those power efficient and weak cheap Celeron laptops that plagued and continue to plague the low-end market. To be honest, they do make sense given their price and the fact that most people, at least on paper, would buy them only to do basic Windows tasks or browse the web, and they are certainly a huge step up performance-wise from the so-called netbooks that dominated the market from the late 2000s to the early 2010s with their single-core Intel Atoms, because these struggled to run even Windows 7 starter. And here I decided to start off with the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 from 2009, as it's still a fun game to play even today, and it does run really nicely on low-end systems. I use low settings, but also high texture quality and the resolution of 800 by 600, and using the game's first mission team player as a benchmark, the game ran with average of 37 FPS. 1% low of 12 FPS and maximum of 124 FPS when looking at the sky. Overall not a bad start, although the frame rate could sometimes tank down in large open areas, but still definitely playable. Next up I tried Half-Life 2, a great classic, and one of the best FPS games ever released. I use the laptop's native resolution and the low settings for this one, but for some reason, when I set the texture and model quality to low, they would end up reverting themselves to high and very high respectively every time I restart the game. A very odd issue, isn't it? Anyways, I use the chapter Highway 17 as a benchmark, as it's a more intensive part of the game, and it does make up for a nice benchmark for weak machines. I got an average of 40 FPS, 1% low with 13 FPS and maximum of 107 FPS where there was nothing much going on. The game hovered at around that average for the most part, and also frequently went above 60 FPS. However, the laptop did struggle with some of the more intensive open areas, in fact much more than what I expected, like in this area right here, with the FPS tanking down to the low 20s, and even below that in fact. Also, the iGPU didn't really like those particle effects. For example, in this particular area right here, the iGPU utilization skyrocketed at 100%, the CPU utilization dropped, and the frame rate tanked down to the tens. Don't get me wrong, the game was still fully playable, and you would get even better performance if you used the original release version with the old source engine, as I used the 2013 release for this benchmark, but still, I felt like the IdeaPad struggled a bit too much in those open areas. Next on the list is the 2005 Need for Speed Most Wanted, my favorite racing game and another great classic. Running the game at the laptop's native resolution once again, using a patch from the internet and medium settings, gave us an average of 34 FPS, 1% low with 18 FPS and maximum FPS of 45. I think the game ran really smoothly in my opinion. Higher settings weren't that great as we are so limited by that iGPU. And speaking of it, this is one of the games that I tested, where I saw the integrated graphics being utilized to their full potential. Overall though, I would be more than happy to play this game on this laptop. Seeing how some of those less demanding 3D games ran, I tried out some more demanding titles on the 15iBY, but before we move on I decided to give it a little bit of relaxing with Quake 3, which ran awesomely as you can see, even with the game's highest settings and 768p resolution. In fact, the game ran so awesomely, with an average of 158 FPS, that I'm not even going to bother showing you guys the average 1% low and maximum figures on the screen, because it's pretty obvious that the game runs amazingly. Not a big surprise though, considering that this is a game that came out in 1999. Of course it's going to run like that, even on a laptop as weak as this one. And speaking of more demanding titles, oh boy, was it tragic. Fire up some more demanding titles, such as this one, the original Sleeping Dogs, that is not even that modern nowadays, from 2012, and you will see what I mean. Speaking of Sleeping Dogs, this is a very underrated game in my opinion. You should definitely try it out. It's my favorite GTA clone, and its combat system is absolutely amazing. But anyways, as you can see, when I'm driving around, the frame rate drops to the mid-10s, even dropping as low as 11 FPS in some instances, although the game will frequently touch the 20s, especially when you are in less intensive areas, but in the end, average of 18 FPS, 1% low of 10 FPS, and maximum of 35 FPS in some of the least intensive areas of the game, and this is at the lowest settings and the resolution of 640 by 480. Also, is that the N2840 bottlenecking its own integrated graphics? To be honest, the game could be enjoyable on this ATMJ for you, especially if you also use a crappy PC or laptop, and have low standards of playability like me at this point. But overall a disappointing result in my opinion, considering that this is not a very demanding game, and especially considering that this is the original version, and not the definitive edition. But you thought I was done? Ho, you are terribly wrong my friend. I decided to try out the well-optimized GTA 5, which many people in the past have asked, will it run on their N2840 Bay Trail laptop, and if a woman running in bikini on the street looks sexy, well then may I tell you, that the performance wasn't as sexy. To be honest, the game did feel kinda playable, if by playable you mean an average of 15 FPS with some texture loading issues when driving, combined with a bit of stuttering as well. I was forced to heavily tweak the settings.cfg file to achieve this awesomeness, and if you're wondering if frame scaling mode made any difference, well I tried setting it to half and there was little to no difference performance wise, so it's not worth using it, as the CPU utilization was already at 100% almost the entire time. Also, about that stuttering, well, as I moved into other areas of the game, the game began demanding more and more RAM, and that little bit of stuttering turned into a huge stuttery mess, as you can see here, and that is caused by the fact that this laptop only has 4GB of RAM, and as you may know, as a modern open world game, GTA 5 is quite RAM intensive, especially if you use an iGPU instead of a dedicated GPU. I guess you can add another stick of 4GB RAM to remedy this issue, so in the end of the day the game will run, and it will be somewhat playable on the N2840 and Intel HD Bay Trail with low enough settings, providing you have 8GB of RAM, because otherwise the game will be a stuttery mess, and also providing you have a godlike patience, because the game takes around 10 minutes to load, so no, it's not really worth playing GTA 5 on a laptop like my IdeaPad 100, 15IBY, 80MJ. Seeing how poorly GTA 5 ran, would you believe that GTA 4, one of the worst, if not the worst PC port to ever come, actually ran better than how GTA 5 did? I mean, I had to use the lowest settings and a command line to lower the resolution to 640 by 480, and the game ended up looking like crap, but it indeed ran better than GTA 5, with an average of 23 FPS, 1% low of 10 FPS when there was a lot of stuff going on at the same time, and maximum FPS of 40 in less intensive areas. Overall, I would still call this a playable experience, as the game still felt rather smooth, albeit with some occasional micro-stuttering, and you can most likely bump up that average by a few frames if you use some low-end mods. The FPS will drop to the 10s in more intensive areas or during heavy police chases or stuff like that, but on the other hand will go up to the 30s in some of the less intensive areas of the game. Overall, not an ideal experience, but still a surprising one for one of the worst PC ports ever released, and given how weak the hardware of this laptop is. If you're wondering what version I used, well, I used the version 1.0.4.0, as people keep claiming that it's the best optimized version of the game, although I didn't notice much of a difference between this version and the more recent ones, to be honest. I also tried out Skyrim, because people like to see this game being used as a benchmark as well, even though I don't play it much, and using the resolution of 800 by 600 and the low settings, but also increased draw distance, because I don't want enemies to appear 2 meters in front of my character. The game ran with an average of 27 FPS, 1% low of 9 FPS and maximum of 60 FPS in some cases. This is also another one of these games where I saw the iGPU being utilized to its full potential without the pesky CPU bottlenecking it for the most part. The game mostly hovered at around the 20s and will frequently touch the 30s, but on the other hand the frame rate will suffer in some more intensive areas or during combat scenarios where the iGPU really struggled. It wasn't an ideal experience, but it was still playable in my opinion, and you can most likely better FPS if you use some low-end mods, as there are plenty of them for this game in Nexus Mods. And since I haven't featured Roblox on my channel since 2019, I decided to include it in the list. I use the game Arsenal, which is basically the CSGO of Roblox, as a benchmark, and even when I used the lowest settings that I was allowed to use, I still got a not so playable average for a multiplayer game of just 21 FPS, 1% low of 9 FPS, and maximum of 34 FPS. To be fair, other less demanding Roblox games could run okay on the N2840, but still, this should run absolutely fine. I mean, this is literally a blocky game made for kids. I have no idea why it performs so poorly. Apparently the N2840 is that bad. Overall, a very disappointing result, and once again the CPU was bottlenecking its own iGPU. I still managed to beat a couple of kids though, so praise me, I guess. Even Minecraft 1.7.10 with the fast settings and Optifine did struggle. Using a draw distance of 6 chunks, the game ran with a playable average of 27 FPS. However, the frame rate frequently dropped to the 10s, and I also saw some occasional stuttering, hence the 1% low of 3 FPS. Lowering the draw distance to only 2 chunks did mean an average of 69 FPS though, so I guess If you want a balance, go with draw distance of 4 chunks, or just use the Windows 10 edition instead of Java edition, as it's much better optimized. Still, it really should be running better than this, considering that this is an older version of the game, and this is not that demanding in general to run. Overall, once again, another mild disappointment. As for something 2D, well, here's Geometry Dash running on the 15iBY, and it ran at the display's refresh rate even with VSync turned off for some reason, though I'm pretty sure that, even if it ran at 360 FPS, I will still rage quit like a 9-year-old on this game. And I also fired up World Conqueror 4, which also ran flawlessly, as you can see. Basically, those 2D titles should run absolutely fine on the N2840. After all, they run even on my crappy Chinese phone. Another thing that can run on this laptop is Crysis, with average of 22 FPS at the resolution of 800 by 600 and using the lowest settings, that is. I would say it ran similarly to GTA 4, which is not ideal, but hey, at least we got the answer to this super important question. Another thing that I noticed was that the game did not fully utilize the laptop's hardware, which makes me think that the ATMJ should be able to pull a bit more FPS in Crysis. Not too sure why this is happening. At least the Lenovo IdeaPad can indeed run Crysis, which is a great achievement for it, I guess. All in all, these benchmarks show that this laptop will do a decent enough job in those old 3D titles from the 90s to the mid 2000s, or in those simple 2D games, but anything that's AAA, and from the 2010s onwards, yeah, it's not going to run that well on this type of a laptop. I also noticed that the CPU was struggling quite a lot in those more demanding titles, even bottlenecking its own iGPU in some instances. Seeing this, I decided to fire up Cinebench R15 to give myself an idea of how weak the N2840 really is, and after waiting some 10 minutes for the CPU test to conclude, I eventually got a score of just 74 CB, and after a little bit of googling, I found out that one can achieve the same score by using a heavily overclocked Prescott Pentium 4 from 2005.
74 CB.
Bravo.
And 2840.
I also decided to do the OpenGL test out of curiosity, and the IdeaPad did not fare much better there, achieving an average of only 5.98 FPS, which, in comparison, is almost 2 times worse than what an Intel HD 4000 with an i3 could achieve. This also makes me curious about how does this laptop perform nowadays in 2022, when it comes out to everyday usage. My expectations are very low at this point, but hey, maybe there we could find some more redeeming factors of the 15iBY ATMJ, and we are going to find out. Given how weak the N2840 turns out to be, I decided to test how does everyday usage work on my Lenovo IdeaPad 100 15iBY. The website from where I originally chose this laptop states that it's made for internet, music, and movies. Let's see if we can do that in 2022. As for internet, I'm using Mozilla Firefox because it's a relatively lightweight browser, and as you can see, Reddit works alright on it, although the laptop needs a bit of time to render all the images when you are scrolling down. Web browsing on the IdeaPad works surprisingly well, especially given the fact that I'm using a Windows 10 version from 2019 and the fact that I'm using a hard drive. Although some more intensive web pages could prove to be a bit problematic for the little atom-based Celeron and perhaps the hard drive, you will probably get better web browsing experience than mine with this laptop, or basically any laptop that has the N2840 or similar, if you use an SSD or just straight up debloat the operating system, if you use Windows 10 that is, which you probably do. All in all, I would say that you can indeed do your web browsing on this laptop provided you have a bit more patience in some instances, because like I said you could see some slowdowns in more intensive pages. As for YouTube playback, well, with a plugin, you can watch videos with up to 720p quality at 60 fps, which is a bit impressive for such a weak CPU. I also tried out Slither.io, which unfortunately did not run all that well. A bit of a disappointment, considering that I used to play this little online game quite a lot back from 2016 to 2017 on this same laptop, although less demanding browser games will most likely work fine. You can also do your office work on it, with no issues whatsoever, which, seeing how web browsing and video playback turned out for the IdeaPad, is not a big surprise. Hell, even my mum uses it for her office work. She even uses Microsoft Teams on it. Another thing that you can surprisingly do on this laptop is 720p 30 fps video editing, even using Vegas Pro 14, which is not even that old of a version. I'm serious. In fact, I would even say that it felt somewhat snappy on this IdeaPad 100. I even used this same laptop and video editor together back from 2016 to 2017 to make crappy Roblox videos and angry German kid parodies. Here are some of the videos that I made back then using this laptop.
Hey, Leopold, you retard. You clogged the toilet, you retard.
Du Wichser! Spielen!
Present? What present? Oh shit.
Ich will spielen! Was? Oh mein Gott, was ist geschehen? Ich habe nicht gespielt!
Yup, I was a YouTuber with this laptop. Ah, the memories. The performance will suffer though if you add in a lot of effects to your video, or if your video is like 1 hour long, and the rendering also takes quite a long time, which I would say is to be expected from a CPU like the N2840. Still, it's super impressive that you can edit and render HD videos using a not so old version of Vegas Pro on this laptop in my opinion. As for internal recording, I used MSI Afterburner's built-in recorder. Recording up to 480p 30 fps at 100% quality did work alright on it. However, try any higher resolutions than this one, and the game performance will suffer. I use the RTV1 video encoding format of RiverTuner because according to MSI Afterburner, it is recommended for weak dual-core CPUs, which the N2840 is. You get the idea. You can do some gameplay recordings on this IdeaPad at a lower resolution for optimal performance, that is. Having taken a look at basically everything that I had to take a look at regarding the 15iBY for my review, I think it's finally time for the conclusion. But before that, I want to tell you guys the story of how I ended up owning it and why I naively chose it back in the day. Basically, from 2014 to summer 2016, when I was 8 to 10 years old, my main laptop was a red AMD HP Pavilion 15. Similar to the one that Budget Builds reviewed a few months ago, this laptop was very unreliable in my experience. It overheated quite a lot, and as a result it would frequently shut itself down when I tried to play, well, anything on it, as part of its protection system. In addition, blue screens of death were a very frequent occurrence, even when I was randomly wandering around the web doing absolutely nothing that should task the laptop heavily, and the hard drive was failing every 2 to 3 months, and as a result it had to be taken to the repairsman every time this happened. One day, in the aforementioned summer 2016, its hard drive failed once again. At that point my parents were tired of paying for repairs related to my crappy HP laptop, and instead they decided to buy me a brand new laptop as a very early Christmas present. They also gave me the opportunity to choose the laptop myself. From that laptop website, I initially wanted an 8GB RAM laptop, but since my parents were not willing to pay a lot of money for a decent laptop, and since the cheapest 8GB RAM laptop available on the website back then was an HP laptop and my parents' opinion on HP was quite negative at that point, in the end I chose this Lenovo IdeaPad 100 that I just reviewed, because it was one of the cheapest laptops available on the website back then. And although it did not have 8GB of RAM, what also impressed me about it was the CPU's clock speeds. I thought that with clock speeds of up to 2.58 GHz, this laptop could end up being a really decent one. Yeah, I had very little clue about hardware. In fact, I did not even know that Celerons are actually processors made for low-end machines, and thanks to my lack of knowledge about hardware back then, instead of choosing a fairly powerful laptop, I ended up choosing a laptop that struggles to run GTA 5 even with super low settings. But hey, at least I was able to edit videos with Vegas Pro and play Roblox on it. Also, it's way more reliable than that crappy AMD HP Pavilion 15 that I used to have, although it's also ironically weaker than its specs wise. I'm serious. What do you guys prefer? Reliability over performance, or performance over reliability? Anyways, that's basically the story of how I ended up owning my now old laptop, and I think it's now really the time to go to the In conclusion, what do I think of my now old laptop, and do I recommend you to get one of those Bay Trail powered laptops like this IdeaPad 100? Well, if you can get it for like $100 at most, for a laptop with a power efficient atom based CPU that was only built for basic everyday tasks in the first place, I guess it's not that bad, because as you just saw, you can still browse the web on it. It does feel a bit slow, don't get me wrong, but you can still do that on an N2840 laptop, even with a hard drive, in 2022. You can also do office work on it. Like I mentioned a few times, my mum uses it for this purpose nowadays, and you can even watch movies with up to full HD quality on it. If you're looking for a laptop to play, for example, GTA 5, Battlefield 2042, Rise or Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Hearts of Iron 4, PUBG, or even Fortnite on, however, then I would not recommend you to buy this laptop, or any Bay Trail laptop for that matter. The closest thing you can do to playing those modern titles on a laptop like this IdeaPad is using a streaming service, such as GeForce Now. Because of its poor performance in modern gaming, not even a year after my parents bought me this laptop, they realized that the 15IBY is a bit too slow, and in June 2017, my mum bought me a gaming laptop, in particular, the Legion Y520, ironically also made by Lenovo, but that's whole different story for another video. If you want a laptop for the purpose of playing old games though, like the original Need for Speed Most Wanted, Half-Life, the old Call of Duty titles from the 2000s, Halo Combat Evolved, the original GTA San Andreas, etc., or some of those less demanding, but also more modern games like The Sims 4, or most 2D games out there, perhaps you want a machine to emulate some of those more basic 3D consoles like the PS1, PS2, Nintendo 64, etc., then the little N2840 that this laptop has will do an alright job with its low TDP for you. Seeing how Need for Speed Most Wanted and the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 already ran on it, this laptop, or any laptop that has the legendary N2840 or similar, would probably benefit from a debloating of Windows 10, provided you indeed use that operating system on your Bay Trail laptop, or if you don't mind sacrificing some of that compatibility, perhaps straight up a more lightweight operating system, such as Linux. Again, the main redeeming factors of the IdeaPad 100 15IBY are power efficiency and decent looking design. While it has a decent looking design, however, it also has very poor battery life for a laptop with a CPU that has a TDP of only 7 watts, poor display viewing angles, and mediocre trackpad. Its keyboard is good though. All in all, I would say that, for what this laptop is, it's a mixed bag, with the blessing of the Winnie Pooh communists. Thank you so much for watching the review of my old laptop. I just randomly came out one day with the idea of making such a review for you guys to see. It was certainly a fun video to make, although it took quite the time to record and edit all of this. I wish you guys a bright, happy, and productive day. Before I forget, here's my final verdict about the IdeaPad 115 IBY 80MJ.